couple seconds of silence, and that's where I'll break for the podcast.
Okay.
Hello, folks. Anybody who's watching or who is catching up a few minutes late, I am here with Stephen Hood. We're going to talk about Storium, the Storium Kickstarter, and everything behind Storium tonight. We haven't officially started recording the podcast yet, but I like to say hello to the folks who are watching the video. Let me go share this, and I will pop the link to this into the chat there, Stephen, as soon as I can get it up. Ah, the wonders of modern technology. There it is. You can see if that works, and I'll also be sharing it on Google Plus.
That seems to be working.
Excellent. No, you know what? Hold off on sharing that particular link.
Okay.
That may be the link that allows people to join the Hangout. To do that publicly, then all kinds of folks.
Yeah, that's not what you want.
That's what okay, here's the link that I need.
Be fun though.
Yeah, it would. I made that mistake once. It was very interesting. Lots of folks from all over the world just popping in for no apparent reason.
Right.
Let's see. There we go. Try that.
That looks better.
The magic of podcasting, folks. You're watching it right here.
What's your Twitter handle for Indie Talks or for you?
No, it's at TrollITC.
Ah, yeah. Cool.
Okay. Let me find you in the windows there. All right. So why don't we do a couple seconds of silence, and then we'll dive right in. And we'll kick it off by talking about Storium. Sound good?
Sound great.
Welcome to episode number 47 of Indie Talks. I am joined tonight by Stephen Hood, who is one of the masterminds behind Storium. I got to say, Stephen, I heard about this probably the day that it launched on Kickstarter, and I've been just watching the numbers climb rapidly. And even this evening, as I was waiting to kick off this podcast, I was popping over to Kickstarter to check out the Storium Kickstarter campaign, and I'm still watching the numbers go up. It's pretty amazing what you guys have done. How long has it been running now? For what, 20-some-odd days?
23 days, roughly. Yeah, it's a 30-day campaign. So we started on the 8th of this month, and we end on the 8th of next month. So just about 7 days left. A little over 7 days, yeah.
So we're going to jump into the meat of Storium in just a moment, but just for the folks listening right now, I'm expecting this broadcast to go up by the 2nd of May, which means you'll still have 5 or 6 days to hop onto the Kickstarter and fund this. And there's links in the show notes, and we'll talk about the link online as well. But you had a goal of $25,000, and you're now somewhere north of $115,000. That's pretty damn incredible.
Thank you.
That must feel amazing for you guys.
It does. It feels remarkable. You know, when you build something, when you create something new, you never really know if people are going to like it or care until you put it in front of them. And we've been working on Storium for 15, 16 months now.
Yeah.
And we've done play testing with a few dozen people at first, and then a few hundred. So we thought things were going well. We thought that we were onto something. But
Yeah.
again, you never really know until you put it out there and describe it to other people who haven't seen it before, and wait and see how they respond. So
Absolutely.
really gratifying to see people excited about what we're doing. It's not just we're not just some crazy people who no one else cares about the idea. It's definitely something that seems to resonate, and that feels really good.
It does. I remember being on G Plus and seeing all of these people starting to back Storium, and at first I was like, oh, this person is talking about the Kickstarter, and oh, this person is talking about this Kickstarter, and then oh, Fred Hicks is talking about the Kickstarter. Oh, and so all these people that I've interacted with online, who I really respect and who I love what they're doing in the world of games, suddenly start backing a project, and my little ears sort of perk up, and I start taking a look, and that's when I emailed you and said, this looks pretty awesome. Can we talk about it? And now here we are.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so before we dive into Storium itself, I just want to get a quick little bit of your tabletop gaming history.
Sure.
As you know, this podcast is geared towards tabletop gamers, but I think Storium is actually really a perfect fit for it, because, well, we'll get into that. I can't explain it in a few sentences, but it's a really cool project. But how did you get into gaming in the first place?
Well, I've been a gamer since I was very young. When I was a teenager, I played D&D, Champions, GURPS, Traveler, Rifts, you name it. Palladium games, TMNT, Robotech, so the list goes on. So I think we probably played the most Champions of any system. My friends and I, Hero System stuff. We were just big superhero fans growing up. And I had a great group of friends that I played with, and I really enjoyed it. And then we all went off to school, and we scattered to the corners of the earth, and I never rebuilt that network. And I stopped playing for a long time. I mean, I played other games. I've always been a gamer. I played a lot of video games, still do. But I came to realize over time, as more and more time went by, how much I missed it.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I missed both the social experience of it and the fun of the game, but I also missed the creative outlet that it represented. It was an opportunity to tell stories with my friends in a way that you really can't with most computer games, for example, most video games. No matter how cleverly written they are, the computer can't improvise, right?
Sure. And even massive multiplayer games or not so massive multiplayer games, you never really get into the role playing. It's now that they have chatting and whatnot where you can actually speak to another person, it may be a little bit better, but it's still kind of tough because you're not telling somebody's story that you know. It's not the GM's story. It's not my story. It's not your story. It's whoever happens to be the developer at EA or whatnot.
Sure. I mean, there are so many amazing games now. The state of the art in video games has come so far. MMOs are a great example. The BioWare games are a great example. I adore them. It's not the same. It's not quite the same as what you can do in a tabletop game. The closest that you can come to that sort of storytelling experience is writing.
Yeah. Yeah, and writing by its very nature tends not to be all that collaborative. Thankfully, we have this thing called the internet out there now, which makes it a lot easier because it's not a lot. If you want to collaborate on somebody with a story now, you don't have to send them a letter. You don't have to call them up on the phone and spend 3 hours chatting. You just send them off an email, send a quick note, or do something like what we're doing right now, and you can have a whole story banged out. So that's a really nice segue right into the heart of Storium. Can you tell the audience, what exactly is Storium, and what did you set out to do with this platform?
Well, we call Storium an online storytelling game. And what it does is it turns writing into a multiplayer game. And it does this by borrowing ideas and concepts and mechanics from a variety of game forms, including tabletop RPGs, card games, video games, but also things like improv techniques and collaborative fiction and interactive fiction and shared universes and all of these things. We put them into the blender, and we came up with something that we think is different and new. And our goal is not to replace or compete with tabletop play. You really can't. It's a unique experience. And we're not trying to compete with play-by-forum systems, play-by-post, which is a very popular activity, but it's one of the inspirations for what we're doing. We're trying to do something new and different, and the goal is not only to have fun, that's of course important, this is a game, but what we're hoping is that we will encourage and help more people to express themselves by telling stories through play.
Sure. I mean, one of my favorite things about tabletop role-playing games is that it's not just a story that I'm making. I tend to be the GM a lot, but it's a story that I'm sharing with everybody else. And more often than not, my players will come up with ideas that I never would have come up with. And I'm fairly confident that you can put something in front of them and say, I don't know how you guys are going to solve this, but I know you guys are going to figure out a way to do it.
That's part of the fun. Absolutely.
Exactly, yeah. And it's really hard to sort of recreate that feeling if you're not at the table with a bunch of other people. You can do the play-by-post things or play by email or play on a forum, which can get fairly close. But I really love the collaborative nature of it. And some of my favorite stories from when I was a kid took place around the table. They didn't actually happen, but I share those experiences with the group that I was with, and that's what makes it sort of magical. I could sit down with my buddy now and talk about something that happened 25 years ago that didn't actually happen in the real world, and we can still share a laugh or what have you.
I still remember plenty of moments, from my games growing up and playing those that it will always be with me. It's a shame. It's a shame though that so much of that experience is ephemeral though. That it sort of goes away. Or you had to be there in some way, and I think actual play write-ups and play by forum address that to some extent.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people to do tabletop play because of the physical constraints and the logistical constraints and even the expense and the complexity of rules and so forth. So I felt like, again, this isn't like a problem that needs to be fixed. It's more that there's something else next to it that might be interesting that this sort of points to. And that's what led us to start down the path that led to Storium ultimately.
Sure. Now, there's sort of a consistent theme that I've been noticing about the guests that I've had on this podcast over the last 6 or 7 episodes. And every single person that has been on this podcast has done something that has made me slightly peeved. And what that thing is that they've given me a new toy to play with that's going to suck up all my free time that I should be putting somewhere else, but I'm not going to be able to help myself. So you guys were kind enough to give me some beta access to Storium, and I've been poking around and looking at making stories and learning all about it. And it's not hard. It's not unintuitive. I don't mean it that way in the time thing. It's not like I'm programming, mud from the 1990s.
Yeah.
What it is it's hard to stop doing it once I start doing it. So you, sir, have to answer for that. You and your team.
I will happily answer for that. That's the dream come true when you build something, especially a game. For someone to say that I don't want to stop. I mean, you should enjoy Storium responsibly. But
I haven't even played the game yet. I'm just starting to make things right now. I can't wait to get to the point where I can actually invite folks in and have them take part in the story that we're going to create together.
So you're just doing your world building still?
I am. I'm still poking around there. We'll get more into this, but there are some worlds that are already there that already exist, and you guys are working on getting more with stretch goals and with funding through Kickstarter. And then you also have the ability to start from scratch and create which I already have 7 or 8 ideas lined up for.
Cool.
But I need to learn the tools first to do it, and it's a really interesting process. So you mentioned before that there are some themes with Storium that tabletop gamers are going to recognize. There are concepts like turns and cards and points and what have you. Can you go into a little bit of detail on what it takes to create a story and then what it takes to play in a story?
Sure, absolutely. So in Storium, we have this concept of worlds, which are, as they sound like, they are fictional worlds. And what they are, really, are reusable storytelling playsets. They give you all the pieces that you need in the game's mechanics to tell a story in a given style or genre or even a specific setting.
Sure.
So the beta comes with 9 different worlds, which are, by design, fairly generic. They're sort of very broadly genre-oriented, from space opera and cyberpunk and fantasy, things that might be more typical tropes from tabletop games, but also things like medical dramas. That's very much on purpose, because we're trying to build something that will have a very broad appeal, both to people who are gamers and maybe people who aren't.
Sure.
So the Kickstarter then is funding a large number of additional worlds, and we've assembled a group of award-winning game designers, novelists, screenwriters, and other storytellers. We have Emmy, Hugo, Campbell, Clark, Stoker, Ennie, Origin award winners. Not to name drop, but I'm going to do it because I'm really proud of it and excited. Thrilled that these people want to be involved. So
I actually... I want to name drop a little bit too, because I just spent 5 minutes looking down the list of Kickstarter, and some of the names that popped out to me: Mark Diaz-Truman, Jason Morningstar, Mur Lafferty, Philomena Young, J.C. Hutchins, Chuck Wendig, Scott Sigler. Those are just folks that I recognize off the top of my head, or that I've interacted with online, who I know are brilliant storytellers and brilliant authors, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg of folks that you have working on this.
Yeah, I'm really kind of hoping nobody pinches me and then I wake up and it's not really happening, because we're really proud of the list of people we have involved, both in their talent but also in the broad perspectives they bring to the table. We purposely brought in people who are game designers, but we've also brought in people who are not, who are novelists and storytellers of other traditions. And that's very much on purpose because, again, we're trying to bridge this sort of gap or divide, if it even really exists, between gaming storytelling and non-gaming storytelling.
Sure.
I think that there's tremendous overlap there, and we're trying to stake out a position right in between those things. And so you can see that in the types of people who we've involved in the Kickstarter. Also, their backgrounds, their perspectives and styles, and the genres that they cover. And we have everything from superheroic sort of settings to Downton Abbey settings, Jane Austen romances. We have a world set in 1920s Harlem Renaissance, which is a fascinating time. We have a Jazz Age world. There's a lot of things going on there, and we're trying to create a very broad canvas for people to play in.
Sure, and I think something that something that we're talking about stories, and now I'm suddenly reading. Something that listeners should take away from this whole thing is that you're not limited by the stories that exist and the worlds that exist on Storium. You can literally create anything. If it is your dream to involve you and a group of friends in a something that takes place around a campfire when you're all Boy Scouts in the 1930s, boom, done. You can go ahead and do it. Or you can sort of experiment with worlds that already exist on there and still customize them and make them your own.
That's right. So we have a lot of people will take, for example, the cyberpunk world that we provide in our beta, which is awesome, by the way. It was written by our lead designer, Will Heinmarch, and everything Will does is great, but his cyberpunk stuff just has a place very dear to my heart. I don't know if you know his game Always Never Now, which is just phenomenal, I think, cyberpunk game. So anyway, I'm a big fan of that world. That's the one I go to a lot. A lot of other people do too, just as an example. And they will go in and they can tear out the specific characters, replace them with other ones. They can change the settings. They can add new ones. It's all customizable. But you can also, as you said, create them completely from scratch. And what Storium does is give you these online tools. All of this happens in your browser, by the way, so people know. It's all web-based. And so you can create these components. The biggest components right now are what we call story cards. And they're what they sound like. They're virtual playing cards, and they cover the different aspects of storytelling in a given world. So those might be the places where the action unfolds, the dramatic obstacles or challenges the players have to overcome, secondary characters, the traits of the characters themselves, and so forth. And so you can create these cards yourself using our tools, or you can use ones that we've already made for you. And then the idea is that once you've made your world, you've crafted your world, you can start a game by inviting friends. And their job is to create characters to inhabit the story. So it's kind of like a GM PC sort of dynamic. But the mechanics are very different. The responsibilities people have are very different than your traditional role-playing game.
So take us through a simple story so that people can see how to both create and run through one as well if they're invited.
Sure, yeah. So the person who starts the game is called the narrator. Very imaginative name we've chosen there, but that's what they do. Their job is to establish the game, to start it, to invite everyone, get them together, basically. And then in play, they start each turn, each scene, we call it, in the story. The narrator's job is to establish each scene, and they do that by describing dramatic challenges that have to be overcome to finish the scene. So this is a fantasy setting. We might need to get past the orcs that are guarding the door, or we might need to negotiate with the merchant to get the amulet we need. The challenges can be physical, or they can be dramatic. They can be dialogue-based, interpersonal relationships, anything you want. And then the narrator then, with those cards as context, writes a passage of text describing the setup. And they're not looking at a blank page. They're given these cues and inspirational points by the cards that they've played in this scenario that they've constructed using the tools. Then the players' jobs are to overcome those challenges, and that's how you finish the scene. So every challenge gets addressed by being played, by cards being played on it by the players. So when you make your character in Storium, you have your own cards, separate from the narrator's cards. And they describe who your character is and what makes them special, and what they can do in the story. So if I was playing Indiana Jones, let's say, I might have a strength, which is that I'm a great fighter and I'm brave. And I might have a weakness, which is I'm afraid of snakes. And I might have a subplot card, which is it belongs in the museum. And what that indicates is my character's sort of ongoing story motivation, which is to liberate artifacts from people who shouldn't have them and make them available to the public. And all of these things drive my actions, but they also inspire me as a player to figure out what to write.
Yep.
And ultimately, that's what the mechanics of Storium are about. They're about helping you turn a blank page into inspiration, right?
And do that collaboratively as well, right?
Exactly. So you're playing off of each other. So let's say the obstacle is to get the idol back from Belloc, and I'm Indy and you're Saito, I think was the name of the guide. We'd have different cards that we could play on that challenge, and I might play like my witty card, let's say, if I'm Indy, and I might make some crack, and I play that card. I physically put it on the challenge card the narrator put down, and now I have that inspiration, that scope to write with, and that's my move, my contribution to the scene. So, and we can go back and forth, and we can all contribute to different goals, challenges, and then we know when the scene's over because the challenges have been met.
That's what I was going to ask. Who or what determines when that scene is over?
Yeah, the players determine it by the cards that they play. So you can say, to overcome Belloc, we need 3 cards. Okay, so I'm going to play, witty, and I'm going to use my whip. And what are you going to do? All right, I'm going to make a distraction. And then you can actually coordinate. We have like an off-stage, out-of-character discussion thread, part of every scene. So you can talk to your fellow players and figure it out. And then you construct the scene together. And the cards you play let you know when you've overcome the challenge. And the cool part is that the cards you play also determine how it turns out. So we had this idea of outcomes. Every challenge has an outcome that's either strong, meaning you got what you wanted, or weak, which is maybe you got what you wanted, maybe you didn't, but there was some complication. And so the cool thing is that as a player, Storium lets you win the right to narrate the outcomes of scenes.
Nice.
You can work and play your cards strategically to control the story when it matters to you. And then other times you can decide to step back and let other people have the spotlight. And so you sort of pass the ball around in a way that I think is pretty unique. It's the closest thing to it probably are some of the collaborative story games like Fiasco, where you really do actively pass around that narrator role.
Right.
And that's one of the many inspirations for what we're doing. But I think the idea is just to let everyone have that moment in the spotlight.
Sure. So I've created a world, and I have 3 friends that are going to come and join me and play in this. How do I have to create the entire narrative before I invite them, or can I do a chapter or scene by scene, or how does that work?
Yeah, you can't create the whole narrative before you invite them. We won't even let you do it. What we'll let you do is set up some of the cards and conditions of the world, the starting conditions. And we'll also let you hint to the players about what kinds of characters you're looking for in the story you've set up. But the story itself is inherently collaborative. So you can't really plan ahead, and we would encourage you not to. That's part of the fun of it. And it does require a bit of a leap of faith for some folks, I'm sure. It's different from a lot of people's GMing experiences, for example, traditionally, and it may be different for a lot of writers coming in. But we find that when people take that leap, they have a lot of fun.
This is really intriguing to me personally as well. Back in the days of Usenet, there used to be some alt creative writing groups that I belonged to, and somebody would launch a writing prompt, and then you just go. And as long as you stay within the rules of the world, you were allowed to pretty much do anything. You couldn't kill off any major character, whatever. And this reminds me a lot about that, because I love doing that, because somebody else would put out a writing prompt like, the monkey has stolen the gem, boom, and then you got to run with it. And this sounds a little bit like that, but much more well-defined, and it gives you, it sounds like, the space and the prompts that you need to really get into it without having to worry about, oh my god, did I hit all these things? Because it'll tell you, right, you have this many cards left, you have to do this, and this is the goal you're reaching for.
Right, exactly. The game doesn't know or understand what you're actually writing, of course. The computer can't really process that, but your fellow players do. The computer gives you the structure and the pacing and the prompts to help you move forward in a way that's hopefully satisfying for everyone. I think the idea is simply that creative constraint can be powerful, that by helping people figure out what to write at any given time, that's actually freeing in a way.
Absolutely. And if Storium ever does get to the point where it's aware of what we're writing, we might have a Skynet situation on our hands. So
that could be very dangerous.
We'll have to watch out for that.
Yeah.
So I was reading through the Kickstarter, and you can buy a membership on the Kickstarter for $20. That's the base level. But you also made a note on the Storium site that Storium is always going to be free. You can always play up to 3 games. What is the difference between playing for free and having a membership for a year?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, and we're still refining this,
Sure.
by the way, and we've gotten a lot of feedback on it, but the idea is that we want to operate Storium as an independent, sustainable business. We're a small team, and we want to do this for a long time. It's really important to us, and we think that we're onto something that's meaningful.
Right.
And so as we look at that, we think, well, how can we support this as an operation, as a business? And we don't want to plaster it with ads. We don't want to do other sort of questionable or scummy things that people don't like, of which there are many examples in both the gaming world and outside of it. We feel like if you play Storium a lot, if it's something you're getting a lot of use and enjoyment out of, then a modest fee is hopefully fair. And so what we said is that we think it's going to be $25 a year annual fee, which is $2 a month.
Yeah.
And if you're signing up in the Kickstarter, it's actually going to be less because you're getting it for a lower rate. And what that does is that lets you use Storium without any limitations, unlimited number of games that you can narrate or play in. If you don't do that, then the idea is your first 3 games are free. And I would just note that Storium games can last a very long time.
Right.
If you could tell a story that goes on for, I'm in some stories that are many months old now, some games rather. So I think that hopefully we're giving you a lot of usage, a lot of access, but we're also asking for something very reasonable in return, which is help us run this thing if you play it a lot.
And you also mentioned something, or you and the team mentioned something about sort of having an app store model with worlds that people create. Can you go into that a little bit? Because that sounds intriguing as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think it's really interesting. So we are building kind of a marketplace around these fictional worlds. And the idea is going to be that anyone will be able to come into Storium and create a world and share it with other people on Storium so that they can play their own games in it.
Sure.
And if they want, they'll be able to also charge for it. And we will give the majority of the proceeds directly back to the creator of the world. And this exactly mirrors the way Apple's App Store works, in that some apps in there are free, but some apps cost money, and Apple gives the majority of those proceeds actually to the author of the app.
Right.
And what we're hoping is that this is a way to value people's creative output, their worlds, in a way that is hard to value today.
Yeah, and it might also be a little bit of a saving grace for someone like me who could probably dump 30 hours a week into something like this and enjoy every minute of it, but also create something that hopefully other people will like and be like, well, you know what? Maybe I will get a little bit of money for the time that I put into this for other people to use this.
Right. I think that's fair. I think it's actually healthy. I think people who create and who share, they don't always want compensation for that, but they should have the option to. And I think it would be a very powerful and meaningful way for people to support creators and artists and writers that they love.
Right.
And so that's what we think it's going to be.
Do you envision it like the App Store as well, with having a fairly low cost for each thing? The 99-cent to $5 range, something along those lines.
That's what we're thinking. Yeah.
Who determines the price?
Going to be cheaper than these are going to be definitely cheaper than your average book or source book or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. And is it up to the author or the creator to determine how much they're going to charge?
It will be, yes. Yeah. We'll have some boundaries on it, so it doesn't get crazy. But it will be up to the author.
So my $1 million story idea is out then. Oh well.
Great.
So I've created a story on Storium, and it's my recreation of the Friday the 13th thing, but I've changed all the names, and everybody lives in the end, which is really strange. But I love it. All the people who are playing in it love it. Who owns that story?
You guys do.
Good.
Yeah. So you own what you create on Storium.
Yeah.
That's a fundamental principle. If you are playing a game in someone else's world, they will have a say in what you can do with their world. And that's the only difference. But Storium isn't going to ask. We're never going to ask for any ownership. In fact, we've taken pains with the writers we've commissioned for the Kickstarter to make sure they understand that we're not claiming any ownership of their worlds.
Right.
We want them to continue to develop them elsewhere. Our dream scenario, honestly, is somebody on Storium creates a world and shares it. It gets to be really popular, and someday Tor or Random House or Warner Brothers comes calling and wants the options to it, and we wave goodbye and congratulate you, and we're thrilled for you. So we really want it to be a platform that encourages creativity and sharing, and we want to set it up in a way that allows us to stay out of the way as much as possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that I've read up on, so I think I know the answer to it. But for our listeners, what is the pacing of a story? How fast do you have to respond, or how slow can you respond if it's you and a couple of people, creating this thing together?
This is the $1 million question, and this is kind of one of the things that we're, I think, really hopefully innovating in
Yeah.
and continuing to, which is that this is fundamentally an asynchronous game,
Mm-hmm.
and it's designed to fit into your life and to span time zones and times when people are on vacation or busy and just don't have time. It's designed to be robust to those sorts of issues.
Sure.
And so when you set up a game, you actually specify a pace, an expected pace, number of scenes per week
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to try to do. And the system keeps track of that. It knows what you said. And if you start to fall behind, it will nudge you gently. It'll send you emails and say, hey, you're holding things up, or you're going to be late pretty soon here. But you can turn those things off, and you can change the pacing. I think we're going to do even more here. We're going to have pause buttons. We're going to have, I'm on vacation, can you please take care of my character for a week? We'll have things like that. But right now, we're seeing paces all over the map.
Sure.
We're seeing games that are running incredibly quickly. We're seeing ones that get a turn every few weeks, and that's fine because that's the pace that people can maintain. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the value of Storium is going to be that we help you maintain those games at those different paces.
Right, right. So I've created a Storium campaign, a story that I'm creating with a bunch of people, and I want to invite somebody who's never heard of Storium before.
Yeah.
I go ahead and I put their email into the invite thing, and the email shoots off for them. What do they have to do to take part in this?
They get a link in that email that lets them sign up if they don't already have an account.
Yeah.
Then they're taken to a page that gives an overview of your game as provided by you. So they see the name of it, the banner graphic, which is kind of like the cover photo. Yeah. They see the description you provided, and they see the world it's based on, if there is one. They see the pace you're expecting, all those sorts of things. And they see other players who might already have joined and their characters. And then they have a choice. They can ignore it, they can decline the invite, or they can create a character. And that's how they join. They create a character, and Storium takes you through that process. The cards that you provided when you set up the game are what they use to create their character, but they can also make their own, just like you can as the narrator. And they can submit a character, and you as the narrator have the ability to ask them to make some changes if you don't like what they did. So maybe you're telling a Western and somebody submits a Jedi, and you say, no Jedis in my Western. That's a cool idea, but that's a different story. And then they can try again until everyone's cool, and then you can start the game.
Damn it, Stephen, now I'm up to 9 ideas. Jedi, Western. Which really is what Star Wars is.
I would play the hell out of that. Yeah,
I would too.
It basically replaced Tatooine with Texas, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no 30 hours of my life gone. So you busted through a whole bunch of stretch goals looking at the Kickstarter, and some of the things that I saw mentioned on there were translating Storium into other languages based on feedback from all the users all the people who are funding it basically through Kickstarter. And one of the new stretch goals that you just put up there, which is pretty lofty, you're looking to hit 200,000, which it looks like it's doable from the rate that you guys are going up. And there's always that big bump at the end of a Kickstarter campaign like this as well, which is Storium in schools, which is something that is really intriguing to me. So I have a 2-part question. The first part is, can you explain what that's going to be about if you reach that goal? And the second part is, can you set age groups and age limits or minimum ages for stories as well? Maybe you can answer that second part first.
The second part is we don't have the capability for that yet, but I think it's something we're going to need.
Yeah.
Definitely. Right now we have an NSFW tagging capability that's kind of like Reddit's in a way. So when you make a game, you can tag it yourself and say, I know that this is not safe for work in the broadest definition. It's not for kids. It's not for the workplace. It's not for a sensitive audience, perhaps. But then other people can also tag your game if they think it's NSFW.
Sure.
And if enough of the community does it, then it gets tagged that way. And all that does is hide it from the views of public games for people who don't want to see it. Kind of like safe search on Google search.
Yeah. And for the 3 or 4 people who may not know what NSFW is, it's not safe for work is what it stands for. And the reason why I asked that is because I have a couple of kids, and my oldest, who is my daughter's 11 years old, absolutely loves to write, and I could see her really, really utilizing this with myself as a lead and her and a couple of her friends taking part in it. However, I'd want it to be something that I could control, which I could because I could only invite certain people, her and her friends, and make sure that they are only exposed to things that are appropriate for an 11-year-old.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's a great segue to what Storium for Schools is all about.
Yeah.
It's really about more than schools ultimately, but that's really I think the clearest way to describe it and to explain it, which is that we've had, since we launched the campaign and even before, we've had a large number of people approach us, backers and not backers, and say, I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, I'm a college student, I'm a high school student, I want to use this in the classroom. Do you realize what you've got here? And we've begun to realize what we've got here. I think that there is an opportunity here to use play and to use games to help students of many ages express themselves, collaborate, learn, potentially. This is really exciting to us, and it feels like a very worthy goal, given what Storium is all about. And so we've really picked up this flag and are running with it, and we want to do it. And I think what it means, to do it right, it really means a serious effort. It means going on talking to teachers and schools and parents and understanding what do they need it to have. And you just listed some very pertinent examples, right, in terms of age restrictions and parental or teacher oversight.
Yeah.
Great example. So, this probably needs to be separate from the public community of Storium in some way. We probably need to have age groups. There need to be teacher controls. There need to be account management. And then there's a huge opportunity for the content itself. Imagine curricula in the form of Storium worlds. That fascinates us, and we're really excited to explore it. So that's what the goal is about. And we set it to 200K because we do think that's achievable if everybody rallies and we can spread the word. But it reflects the significant effort that's involved. This will be spinning up another part of the company, we think. And we've already connected with a bunch of folks, a bunch of educators. We have some announcements probably coming in the near future about that, about who we'll be working with. So we're really interested in getting going on this. And I think we've just scratched the surface of what could be done here right now.
Sure. I think a platform like this has a really enormous, nearly unlimited potential when you think of all the different things that you could plug into it. But I think one of the hardest challenges that Storium has to overcome is one that I had to overcome myself, which is really, what the heck is it? How do you classify it? Because I could turn to somebody and say, hey, you got to check out the Storium thing, and they'd be like, okay, well, what is it? Well, it's a game, but it's not a game. It's a collaborative writing, and I could see their eyes dim or lighten up depending on what they're into. So if you, and I'm sure you guys have wrestled with this a lot too, if you had to sum up what Storium is and give an elevator pitch of why somebody would be interested in it, how would you go about doing that and making it succinct enough to really cover what you're doing? Because it's a really broad, interesting, fun thing that I think everybody could benefit from. Storytellers, writers, gamers. It sort of fits everybody's style, but it's hard to say that, as you can see, because I'm now on my second minute of trying to answer this question. So how would you sort of compartmentalize that and make it small and tell somebody about Storium?
We have spent countless hours on this question. You've totally nailed a fundamental metaphysical question about what Storium truly is and how we describe it. And we've changed dramatically over the last year plus in how we talk about it, the language we use. And what we came up with, the best thing we've come up with yet, was online storytelling game. And online tells you that it's something that you do on your computer. Storytelling is a very broad and evocative term that implies writing but doesn't mandate it, right? And then game, I think you made an interesting point, which is well, I'm not sure it's a game. You're not the first one to say that. There's a whole world of debate about what a game really is, right? And people use that like a weapon sometimes, or they use it in a constructive way too. It's a huge question. I think it's a game. We've designed it to be a game because we think that the game is part of the magic, because what it does is remove some of the judgment that people face often when they write, right? When you turn in that assignment, or when you show that poem to your friend, or you publish that short story in an anthology, judgment is a lot of what people fear and what holds people back in their creativity. It's just part of being human. And games free us, I think, from that. Not entirely, but in very powerful ways they can. And so we've decided to, again, we think it's a game, and that's how we approach it, but we decided to really make that a key part of how we talk about it too, because that's important. That's important to what we're trying to do.
Sure. And I think it's nice too. I mean, you say that as somebody who's written something and put it out there and have people comment on it. You got to kind of have the thick skin, but you also have to be able to be okay with people not liking it.
Oh yeah.
Because you're not going to please everybody. You're not even going to please most of the people sometimes. But
Right.
I like that this is a collaborative experience because not only does it share the fame, but it sort of shares the blame as well. If somebody doesn't like something, well, all of us made this, and I'm sorry that you don't like it, but the three of us or the six of us or whatever really do, and these 47 other people over here do as well. And it allows you to sort of take that pain and spread it out a little bit too, if other people are going to look at it.
I think that's well said, and also we're noticing something interesting, which is the collaborative nature of it, and the fact that it's about storytelling is really having the effect we hope, which is a lot of people are able to disassociate themselves from their character's success.
Right.
They're able to say that what's important here is the story, not that necessarily that my character wins. And that's a powerful and beautiful thing, because I mean, think about the power of that just socially in small groups, and for people, especially people who are young, to learn that lesson. I think is really interesting. That like, well, I'm contributing to something beyond my own motivations, perhaps.
Right.
And so, some of the best stories, most of the best stories, I would say, involve the suffering of their characters, right? I mean, the hero struggles before they succeed ultimately, and so in a lot of games, you're constantly trying to win. In Storium, because of the way it works, sometimes you choose to complicate your character's life, and it feels good. It feels cool. Like you're like, oh, that was awesome. Let's see what happens next. And that to me is really fun and interesting.
Yeah, and it helps combat one of my biggest problems with role-playing games, which is getting people to come up with a backstory of their characters before we even sit down, because this gives you a chance to sort of play through the character to the point where, in a role-playing game, you're sitting down, and it may take 10, 8, 6 sessions before you really feel like I have ownership over this character, and it's somebody who I've invested time into. But this is the kind of thing, it seems to me anyways, where I would be sitting there in between taking turns thinking, oh, this is kind of, what if I did this? And it almost gives you that ownership immediately. You sit down, you create your character, you start your story, and then boom, the next thing you know, you're thinking about different directions that these characters can go in and how to play it, not only to make the characters better, but to make the whole process better as well.
I'm glad you feel that way. That's exciting to me to hear.
It's almost like you tailor-made this for me, but the good thing about me saying that is I think that a lot of other people out there probably feel that way as well, which is why it's becoming so popular, and why you're seeing such a surge of backers on Kickstarter, and why you've gone above 400% of your funding goal, because this is scratching a lot of itches that I think a lot of gamers have that they didn't have a specific way to scratch before. And what makes it a unique idea for me is that nobody else really thought to do this, and then you guys came along, and here it is, and now we're all saying, son of a, why didn't I do this? This is what I've been looking for. This has been something that I've been trying to do. So kudos to all of you guys, too, for doing that. I think that's one of the reasons why it's becoming so popular. It's not only does it look like a good product, but it also looks like a good project, something that I, as a user, would be willing to invest a lot of time in.
Wow. Thank you so much for saying that. That's really meaningful. I really appreciate it. I should say, this is obviously not just me. So we have a pretty awesome team. So there's myself, there's my co-founder Josh Whiting, who's our head engineer. Josh is an amazing engineer. I've worked with him for almost a decade now, maybe coming up on that. So we've worked together on a number of startups. We've founded companies before. And he's really passionate about what we're doing with Storium, and is tireless. He is right now, as I'm talking to you, IMing me about bugs and issues. So he's pretty amazing. Our lead game designer and head writer, I mentioned earlier, is Will Heinmarch. He's a very gifted designer and writer. And a lot, if not all, of the special, insightful mechanics that make up Storium come from Will's brain and from his influence on the process. Will and I connected very early on in the process of building Storium, when it was just have an early prototype, an early idea. And we shared the same goals for it, and he's had a tremendous impact on the product. I'm very grateful for his mentorship and his guidance and input and contributions to the project. And then we have 3 other advisors. So JC Hutchins, you mentioned earlier. JC was a very early supporter who got it very quickly before a lot of people, which is super cool. JC is a transmedia storyteller, so he works on these projects that span print and the web and television and so forth. And he wrote a series of books called Seventh Son. I don't know if you've heard of those. They're fantastic techno thrillers about human cloning. And he did crowdsourcing there. He did podcasting. So he's a really innovative guy. Mur Lafferty is involved. Mur is what won the Campbell Award for Best New Writer last year. She wrote The Shambling Guide to New York, and more recently the sequel Ghost Train in New Orleans. She's a wonderful writer and has a background as a game designer too. And then Chuck Wendig, who we mentioned as well. And Chuck is a phenomenal writer. He's written the Miriam Black books. He wrote Blue Blazes, which is probably my favorite read last year.
I finished it like 2 days ago.
I'm so jealous. I want to read it again for the first time. Isn't that great?
Oh, it's a great book.
He just finished the sequel, I think. So,
oh, really? Oh,
yeah, I'm hoping to God I get an advanced copy. I don't know if he's hearing this, but anyway, so these are our advisors and our team, and they're pretty amazing. I certainly could not have done this on my own. So.
And it sounds like you're going to have a really, really awesome user base in there as well, which is what makes something like this thrive. And there's another point that I saw on the Kickstarter too that I just want to touch on briefly as well, which is socializing Storium. Can you tell us, I know that this is something that you're working on right now, you and the team, but can you tell us sort of what direction you think this is going to be heading in as far as socializing it?
Right, socialized healthcare, right? That's what we're talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. If I have a problem, I want to be able to go to Storium and get a diagnosis.
Yeah, when I chose that word, I thought, I don't know if that means what I think it means, but that's all right.
Mama. Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea there is just that, right now in Storium, in the beta test that we have live right now, and by the way, just to be clear on that, like we have a live beta test that people can get into at the lowest backer level, so they can come in, pledge, and play right now. And that's, I think, been really helpful and sort of unusual for a Kickstarter.
Yeah, and right in.
Cool. Well, that's the idea. So, yeah, but it's great. Like the game is pretty fully formed and highly functional, but a lot of the functionality that sort of surrounds the game is in an early stage still because it's a beta. And one of the things we hear a lot from the players is that they want more social interaction. They want to make it easier to find players to play with, to find games that they're interested in, to propose them. They want to share what they're doing with the outside world more on social media and otherwise. They want to be able to recognize good gaming and good writing, like whether it's saying that you're the MVP of this scene or kudos on this move you just wrote. I think that was a great move. They want some way to do that as well. And then there's going to be more stuff we're going to need to do around, for example, when we have this library of worlds, you're going to want to be able to say like what you thought of it.
Sure.
Whether it's like Amazon ratings, God help us, or some other similar system. So there's a whole bunch of again, this sort of infrastructure that surrounds the gameplay that we want to build out, and a great majority of it is about social interaction. So we realize that there's a lot of opportunity here, and so we made a stretch goal out of it. And that will allow us to really dedicate the time and resources to being pretty aggressive with all that functionality.
Excellent. So looking towards the future, when do you all plan to have Storium launch? When will it be out of beta and into version 1.0?
So we just cleared yesterday a stretch goal that commits us to launching a second beta test that we're calling a gamma test. Between now and the public launch. So backers will get an updated refresh of the game that will have a bunch of these enhancements in it, which will be cool. The actual public launch, what we say in the Kickstarter and what we're planning for is November timeframe. We'd hope, we'd love to get to it sooner. I don't know if we'll be able to. There's so much to do. A lot will also depend on the funding level that we are able to achieve in terms of how many more people we can bring in to help us. But we think that the November timeframe we should have something ready to launch, and we're really excited to do that.
Excellent. So we're going to wrap up pretty soon here, but before we do that, let's let everybody know how they can get involved. Where can we find Storium online? Thank you.
So the site itself is at storium.com, Storium.com, and there's a link there to the Kickstarter. You can also search for Storium on Kickstarter to find that page, and pretty much everything you'd want to know about it is there or accessible from there. And again, a $10 pledge at the lowest level gets you instant access to the beta.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also at Storium on Twitter, and we're very active there. And there's a link to our blog on our homepage as well.
Excellent. And I'll have all of this up in the show notes as well for folks who go to
Thank you.
Who want to look at this. So I ask a very specific question at the end of all of my podcasts, and it always has to do with gaming and the social aspects of gaming. But we may have to modify the question a little bit, because for me, I tend to do a lot of tabletop gaming. I do a lot of computer gaming as well, but having a family and kids and whatnot, I have to sort of limit myself as to where I can spend my time. But gaming has always been a social thing for me, and it's never social to me unless there's some kind of food or beverage involved. But this is an online undertaking, an online enterprise. So I guess what I'm going to ask you is sort of a modified version of this. When you are sitting in your office or in your virtual space contemplating Storium, what is your go-to snack and or beverage while you're doing so?
Oh man, well, you know this is a writing game.
It is.
You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say bourbon or whiskey.
Yeah.
You know, like a good writer, I have to say that. I think some form of Scotch or
Scotch.
bourbon.
I'll go with Scotch. That's good.
Yeah. So that's what I will say. And you know, sometimes it's sparkling water, but that's not an interesting answer. You know. So yeah, and then in terms of snacks, it's probably, you know, for me, I adore spiced nuts, and so I have like spiced nuts and bourbon, and I think that's a pretty good combination for writing.
That sounds like something I might just go and get myself as soon as we're done here.
I highly recommend
it.
A
very good combination.
Well, your time of day, you're ready for it. Go for it.
I am.
A little earlier for me. So.
Excellent. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on Indie Talks and for telling us all about Storium. It's a project that I am very excited about. Personally, I am also a backer. So I am super psyched that I have beta access and that I'm going to be tooling around in this for quite some time to come.
I appreciate it so much. It means a lot that you're so excited about it, and we're so grateful to everyone who's been backing us. It's just amazing. We appreciate it very much.
Excellent. Well, I'd say good luck, but you're already way overfunded, so even more luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Reach that $200,000 stretch goal, because I want to see this in schools too.
So do we. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thanks.